With that, we'll begin with Mr. Quigley. He's a native of Colorado, and by virtue of his position with the High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area program, he has firsthand knowledge of what's happening in Colorado and in other states that have legalized marijuana. Mr. Quigley strongly believes that misinformation and rhetoric about today's marijuana and legalization needs to be replaced with facts stemming from valid scientific research, so that individuals and policymakers alike are better able to make informed decisions about the marijuana issue. His complete bio is in our member packets. So, Mr. Quigley, welcome to Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We hope the weather outside is making you feel better at home.
Just like being at home, sir.
All right.
Just like being at home.
You may begin at any time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, first off, thank you for having me and thank you for inviting me here. As you said, my name is Dale Quigley. I am the Deputy Coordinator for the National Marijuana Initiative with the HIDTA program. What sets us apart from the other HIDTA programs is that we are not an enforcement initiative. We are about information sharing and about education. That is our sole purpose. We track what's taking place in this country with today's marijuana and try to share that information so people can have a better understanding of what's taking place today and what's taking place with this drug. The issue that we have faced is that this is not a simple issue. This is a very complex issue, and it has a lot of consequences and keys to it. When we look at yes, no, right, wrong, red, blue, we can't resolve the issue of legalization with that simple of rhetoric. When we look at the matrix, we see that the premise of legalization is built upon premises, spheres of influence, different platforms. But when we boil down to the bottom of this, we're still talking about the legalization of a Schedule I controlled substance, which means by definition, a high probability for abuse and no accepted medical use in the United States. But yet we want to legalize it because we want to regulate it. We want to legalize it because we want to tax it. We want to legalize it because we can control it. And what we're seeing is that's not always as easily done as it is said. One of the byproducts of this that comes from both sides of the equation in the sense of fairness, and please understand, this is where I come from. We come from the middle. Our information is trying to be unbiased. We try to look at the neutral position of this, try to step back and understand the broader picture of this is taking place. But a common problem to both sides is their minds are made up. Their minds are made up. As the chairman said, one of the things we need to do is to listen to the other sides on this. There's a lot of information that can be garnered from listening to both sides and understanding the positions and understanding the facts. But what we need, in fact, number one, is we need more valid research into today's marijuana. We've got strains of marijuana right now being produced at levels that we have never seen before in history. We were told by the industry several years ago that, oh, we'll never see anything higher than 15 to 18% THC content. But now we've got 15 and 18 and 20 and 25 strains of raw marijuana with concentrations in excess of 30%. We've got concentrates at the 70 and 80 and 90%. The research to the effect on that in our bodies, in our society, to our culture, we have no idea. There's lots of good research out there right now. But if it predates about 2012, 2013, a lot of it's just good foundational information. We're lacking research. We're building policy, we're making laws, and we're doing it in a vacuum of understanding what the cause and the effect is. And that's one of the things that we're urging folks to do. Take the time, do the homework, learn what's going on, and understand where the gaps are. If we understand that, we do a lot better. Everyone wants to throw data out at you, and I'm not going to be an exception to that either. But we have to understand how to look at data, especially when they want to use Colorado as the source of this data. We look at it from Colorado's standpoint because we were the first ones to go legal by virtue of one time zone during that election. When we look at data, we have to understand data are nothing but seeds of information. And currently what we've got right now is we've got emerging and trending data. But when we look at the topic and we look at specific topics, we may not have some of these answers for another 10 years, 15 years. Some of it may be generational. We don't have that information. We don't have the research to support it. And the caveat I offer to you is that when we want to talk about Colorado being the model to this, we're still figuring it out there too. And we've been doing this for 5 years now. I've heard it akin to building an airplane while it's in flight. That's a difficult concept to get through, but we're still dealing with the effects of the laws. We've been doing this for 5 years now. We've got 5 full years of data. We're still figuring out what the causes and the effects are. As of the end of the election period in 2018, this is what we're looking at. We've got 22 states that have gone medical. We've got an additional 11 states, including the District of Columbia, that have gone from medical to recreational, which, by the way, is the normal sequence of events. For Colorado, it took 12 years to get there. Now we're seeing once the state goes medicinal, within 1 or 2 legislative cycles, their sudden push is to go with recreational, okay? So as we take a look at this, let's look at Colorado as a whole, how we got started on this thing. Back in November of 2000, this was the first initiative that made it to our ballots. This was a constitutional amendment to allow people with certain debilitating medical conditions to have 2 ounces of marijuana, can have 6 plants, and can elect to have a caregiver to take care of that for them. In the grand scheme of things, me having access to 2 ounces of weed may not seem like a big deal. But again, step back with me a little bit. If I've got 2 ounces, you've got 2, this turns into an Oprah show. You've got 2, and you get a car, and you get a car. Where is the supply for that source of demand? And what's the vertical impacts to them? We'll talk about that in just a second. In 2009, the federal government came out with what was called the Ogden Memo. This was guidance to the Department of Justice and the federal employees about what they're going to do about marijuana. And the first part of the memo read as it should. They recognized the fact that the cartels are making a lot of money out of this. They recognize the danger it has to society. But when you turn the page, it goes, but if you're investigating someone who's in clear compliance with state and local law, we're not going to direct federal resources to this. So what happened was this. From 2000 to 2009, it laid there benign in our state. Very little activity. Around 2006 and 2007, you started to see a little more activity leaning toward the medical side. Once this came out, the impression was the state and local guys are doing nothing about it because they can't touch us because it's legal. And now the feds aren't going to do it. The floodgates opened up for us. We went from having just a few card holders for medical card holders. As you can see, we had just an incredible application spurge. By the time we got to the end of 2009, we went from 4,800 card holders to 41,000 card holders. Application came coming in. Shop after shop, dispensary after dispensary are trying to open up so they can make money. If you're going to get in on the bottom floor or something, that's the best place that you're going to find the best profit margin, is being there at the beginning. What happened, though, by the end of 2010 for us, we had reached such a market saturation in Colorado with the shops that they started self-consuming themselves. Prices came down so low they couldn't sustain a business model. Now it's in competition with one-on-one with the shops. All these folks invested a lot of money and lost it. One by one, the little mom and pop shops that were there slowly started to disappear. And what came in its place was large corporate marijuana. And they started buying up, franchising, and doing that type of thing. Right now, that's pretty much what you see in Colorado is the mid to large level manufacturers. This started off actually as a joke, to be honest with you. We were saying that, you can drive through a town and you see Starbucks and McDonald's everywhere. But as you start to drive through Denver, we kept seeing the green crosses and the marijuana signs. We reached out to Starbucks and McDonald's in 2017, this is the last pull of this data, and asked them, how many shops have you got? And what they gave us is they have about a total of 600 combined shops in Colorado. When we looked at that same time period for our medical and our retail dispensaries, we had almost twice that. And as of just this last March 1st, I pulled some new data for you, we've seen a substantial decline in the number of medical dispensaries and a corresponding increase in retail dispensaries. Because according to the folks that are on the medical side, that's where the money is to be made, is medical retail, not medical by itself. Flash forward, November 2012, this is where we went to recreational. It allowed for 1 ounce of product for anyone over 21. Essentially, this turned into going into the liquor store. As long as you have a proof of age, you don't have to have a medical card issued from a doctor. As long as I can show I'm 21 or older, I can go in and get up to 1 ounce. Again, we go back to the concept of it's only 1 ounce. But when you step back and figure if that's availability of 1 ounce for anyone that's 21 and older, suddenly there becomes the issue of supply and demand. How are we going to meet that supply to meet that increased demand? One of the byproducts we thought of this one, we thought the medical card holders were going to go away. And actually, we were wrong for a couple of years here. For the first couple of years after this, the medical marijuana card was still very coveted and still being possessed at a high number. It's only been in the last couple of years that this number has started to decline. And a lot of it goes back to taxation. We'll talk about tax revenue here in just a second. But the bottom line is I pay more in taxes at the retail side than I do at the medical side. And at the medical side, I can get 2 ounces. On the retail side, I'm only prohibited 1. The drawback, though, is on the retail side, nobody's tracking the sale specific to a person. Since we started taxing this for lawful sales in our state, we look at a couple different products. The first one we look at is the edible products. Anything that we can consume orally this way, all right? So this is the cookies, the candies, and things like this. Very popular because it offers a lot of alternatives and options for the folks that choose to use. It doesn't have the same stigma. Obviously, there's no odors to be concerned about, like as you would with smoke, nothing visible as vaping, okay? But when you look at this, we can see the popularity. In the first year, 4.8 million product units were sold. Last year, 11.8 product units were sold. And these come in various concentrations. We still sell and track raw flowering bud. We take a look at this in terms of pounds. We started off with 148,000 pounds. Last year, we were at 413,000 pounds. Year before that was even higher. And the thing to put this in perspective is we're talking about 500,000 pounds of product that's sold and used in grams and ounces, which gives you an idea. Once you step back and look at the numbers and what that means, you see the scope on it. The third area that they're tracking in the state of Colorado, and it's been in the last 2 years they put a specific emphasis on this, is the emerging issue of concentrations. Concentrates have become the big issue. It provides a bigger bang for the buck. These are high-potency THC content that you can smoke, consume, and you get a much longer and more sustainable high out of this. The one that is of most concern, if you look in the top left-hand where it says crumble, and to the right of that where it says crystalline sugar, you're sometimes going to hear a crystal, you're sometimes going to hear rock. Some people actually refer to it as cracked weed. All it is a naturally occurring substance that's in the plant, THCA, tetrahydrocannabinolic acid. The botanists have figured out how to extract that and isolate that as a standalone product, condense it down to a crystalline form, and market it to the general product. Potency levels of this product are being rated at 99.5% potency for THC. Now, there's research out there to support the use of low-dose THC for therapeutic treatment of pain. I get that. We're talking like 3–5%. But at 99.5%, it leaves little doubt what the intention of that drug was. The bottom line is potency is driving profit, and the market demand by the consumers is for higher potency products. And industry is merely going along with them and producing those products for them. Retail sales from taxation, everyone wants to know about how much money is coming in. Well, last year we sold well over $1 billion of product in our state. We look at taxable revenue coming in from the retail side. Last year we were at $240 million. When we look at the medical side, because this is where it all started, we notice something a little more drastic. It's pretty flat. In fact, it's actually gone backwards. Where on the retail side we've seen an increase of over 350%, on the medical side there's actually been a very mild decrease in the amount of products sold under the guise of medical. A lot of this goes back to taxation. When we look at the taxation rate in Colorado, we're taxing at about 30%. That's before any local fees get added into it. With that kind of money, the premise being is that if we tax it, we regulate it, we can control it. You start hearing the argument, well, you're taxing it so high, you're driving people to the back market. So you have to understand both sides of the issue. If we try to tax it and regulate it, there's going to be those that's going to argue that's going to send folks to it. But here's the problem with this. We can tell you how much was sold. I can tell you how much revenue we got in off of medical. I can tell you what we got in off of recreational. Like with any business model, to determine the return on the investment, what do I have to know? I have to know what has it cost me to do business. What number we can't get? We can't get that first variable in the equation. Nobody is really tracking that information. What does it cost the state, the cities, the counties, the municipalities? What does it cost them to set up systems and programs to help monitor the industry that's in their jurisdictions? We've talked to economists about this, and they said the data's not there. First off, you're too new into this for only 5 years, and quite frankly, nobody really tracks that information. So again, it makes it hard for us to understand if we're ahead of the game of this. But here's the windfall taxation rate it is to the state of Colorado. Less than 0.8%, roughly 0.9%. That's it. That's the windfall. We were promised a huge cash cow that was going to come our way. Other states look at legalizing this for the exact same purpose. We've been doing this for 5 years now, and that's as good as it gets for us. I'm not sure that was the best investment on this one for us. Everyone wants to talk about highway safety and public safety data, so let's spend a little bit of time there since we're kind of cramped for time. When we look at accident rates, we have to understand something. And before I even go down this trail with you, please give me 2 seconds of undivided attention. I am not saying marijuana is causing these accidents. I'm not saying marijuana is the fault for the fatal accidents we're going to talk about. What I am saying is this, though. Marijuana is becoming so prevalent in our driving community that as a public health and a public safety issue, we have to look at it. Is it a contributing cause to what the increases we are seeing? Okay? So we're all clear on that one. So the nice thing about this is now more people than just government are starting to look at this data. The Institute for Insurance Highway Safety started looking at this. They did a survey from 2012, from 2016, and then a follow-up in 2017, where they looked at the marijuana states and the neighboring states that are not legalized, and they compared collision rates. And what they found overall is that the states that had gone legal had a higher accident rate than the states that had not gone legal. Over the 4-year period as a whole, and even as the 1-year period as a gap. The only exception to that one is our friends up in Oregon. They had a slight decline, but it's still about where it was, so it's relatively stable. When we look at the total accidents by year in Colorado, we've had an 18% increase. Now again, I'm not saying marijuana causes this. Where our economy in our state is doing really, really well. People are flocking to our state, so we've got more people driving. Well, if we got more people driving, the probability is there's going to be more accidents. But when we start looking at specific data and look at our fatality rates, we've seen some increases. And the correlation to when marijuana was legalized and some of the sidebar issues, it caused us to take notice. This are the fatals that we've had by year. Anything in blue is pre-legalization, green is post-legalization. We've seen that we had a downward trend in our fatals prior to legalization, and then we see we had an upward trend since then. Of concern here is this. Overall, our fatal accident rate is up about 45% in Colorado. But when we pull the drivers that test positive in those accidents, just for the toxicology results where they test positive for marijuana, those rates have gone up by 157%. That caught our attention. When we started looking at the data as a whole, and again, when we look at data, you have to look at two things. You have to look at the raw number and the percentage that it represents. So when we look at the raw numbers, we see in 13 we had 71, in 2017 you had 162 drivers died in accidents that tested positive. Does that seem like a lot of people? Some people would say no. I would say at what point is any one number cutoff point for acceptable collateral threshold of damage? At what point is life worth? When we take a look at this number and compare it against all accidents, we see a jump on this thing. In 2010, about 10% of our drivers were testing positive for THC. By the time 2017 came along, we're up to 25%. Again, not saying marijuana is causing the accidents, but it's becoming a contributing factor that in public safety we have to look at. The presence of marijuana, especially marijuana and alcohol, are the two most leading polydrug issues that we deal with in criminal justice. It's that prevalent and that easy to get. So we started to look at use rates. Now the use, by the way, if you can see that this is the state capitol, our version of that beautiful building you've got right next door to you. This is on 420, which has become the party day in our town. At 4:20 in the afternoon, everyone gathers there and they have a smoking. You know, I had a presentation I did, and one guy said, well, are they allowed to smoke in public? No, they're not. I said, well, why didn't they arrest them? I said, where do you begin? It's like General Custer time. Where do you begin? You've got a couple hundred cops and you have thousands upon thousands of people out there. So we started looking at use rates. We looked at 30 days, within the last 30 days, defined as current use rates. What we saw in our state is that our kids are that much higher. We're looking at 34-35% than the national average. We have maintained the position in the top 10 position for the last few years. The good news is that that use rate, not only nationally, but also in Colorado, is going down. I mean, that's great news. We're happy to see that. It's also the number 3 age group seeking treatment for substance use disorders in our state. When we take a look at this age bracket for last 30-day use, on the far left, you have the U.S. rate, and then you have Alaska, Colorado, District of Columbia, Oregon, and Washington. We can see that since 2011, even prior to legalization, the national use rate for this age bracket's gone up. Down. When we look at the first states that went from medical to recreational, we see that their use rates by year are either at or substantially higher than the national average. When we looked at the non-marijuana states on this thing, their rates were at or below. We go to the next age bracket. This is the college kids. This is the largest cohort that we've got using in America right now. This 18 to 25 crew, they represent the highest use rates that we have nationally and also in our state. And we see that as a consistent pattern as we go from state to state. They're still about 58% higher than the national average, second leading group seeking treatment for substance use disorders in Colorado. And when we take a look at the national comparisons here, we see that nationally, this age bracket has slowly been creeping up. But the same model that we look at, medical going to recreational states, use rates are at or substantially higher than the national average. Older folks, 26 and older, this is now the fastest growing group of people going to start to use. Whether they're reinitiating because they haven't smoked in a long time or they're initiating for the first time, but this is what we're seeing. When you see a percentage change like 103%, Be cautious when you see people throw data at you like that one. You have to know what the end value was. In this case, you have two relatively small numbers. And when there's a change between two relatively small numbers in value, the percentage change starts to look bigger, okay? So it's a word of warning on these things. Number one age group seeking treatment. Not sure if it says, you know, I need to get my stuff together, or it's causing enough problems, I need to do something, but they're moving on. But look at the upward trend that we're seeing nationally and in these marijuana states, especially in the last few years. Interesting side note, geriatric folks, senior citizens, which I can now count myself as one, this is a next largest age group that's going in to start using this, okay? Again, accessibility, availability is there. The problem is, where's this perception of harm and where's the point of initiation? We looked at 2017 information from SAMHSA for people 12 and older. What drug did you initiate with? You've got the list on your left. Here's what you've got. Alcohol was the first, marijuana was the second, and oddly enough, prescription pain medicine was the third illicit drug they started using. And that's, again, ages 12 and up when we look at this. Perception of harm, when they were given these drugs, everyone picked heroin as the one they're most afraid of because there's enough data and there's enough public conversation out there about the facts that people are dying from this. When they looked at this, they put heroin at the top of the list, and marijuana was absolutely at the bottom of the list, more so than even alcohol or cigarettes. We take a look at that one. We started looking at emergency room data. I'm giving this to you as a partial information just so you have the warning behind it. We started looking at the data coming out as early as the early 2000s. What we had was reports coming out, this one out of Pittsburgh, said places that have more dispensaries have more hospitalizations related back to marijuana. Journal of American Medicine put one out in 2014 and says, yeah, we're seeing increased patient admission related back to marijuana issues, but the level of psychosis that we're seeing is causing great concern. And they attributed the psychosis level to the THC concentrations that are currently available. People just don't know how to handle it. When we looked at actual data from Colorado from 11 to 14, we were, by the time that time period was done, we're sending about 50 people a day to an ER or ED somewhere in the state of Colorado. Now, take a look at data. You have to understand the gap on this thing. The medical industry was changing their billing coding system from ICD-9 to ICD-10 during the same time frame. There is no corresponding codes from ICD-9 to correspond to the new system of ICD-10. It took 16 and part of 17 to get through that. We're hoping by the time this year is done, we're going to start to be able to pull good data for the same billing codes now for admissions that are marijuana related for 2018. So, the reason I offer that to you, if you hear information about that, people start talking about medical treatments, and you hear those dates, be aware of that gap because it does impact the quality of information. It reduces the scope. A lot of the treatments that we're seeing in emergency rooms, little kids, it's the inadvertent exposures. They see it, they grab it, they eat the cookie, whatever it happens to be, just because we're not being cautious about how we're responsible with the product we have in our house. The teens and tweens, not much there. The older folks, that's where they see the next jump. Either they're initiating for the first time or reinitiating, and they don't understand the potency levels. They start getting that high, the sweats, the tingles. They're not used to that level of high, and they don't know how to perceive it. The tachycardia sets in. They end up at the hospital. They think they're having a heart attack. No, just too high, too fast. They don't know how to handle it. Some folks won't even go to the ER. The premise being is you cannot overdose on marijuana, which that's actually a fallacy. Why not just call the ER or call the Poison Control Center instead? So we take a look at data for legalization, not only for recreation, but moving forward. And we've seen a substantial increase in calls to the Poison Control Center, people reporting the marijuana being the proximate cause of the issues that they're having. And even when you break it down by age group, the 26 and older are still the group that we see the most frequent calls to poison control, and then the inadvertent exposures of the kids, where again, they get a hold of a piece of candy or a gummy or some type of lolly on that one, and that's where the exposures are coming from. When we take a look at the broad spectrum, and I know we're going fast on this. This is 30 minutes out of normally what's a 2- and 4-hour presentation that we do. But the key points are this. When we look at the marijuana relationship in our fatal accidents, we've seen it gone up. We've seen that the use rates for the 12 to 17-year-olds in our state are going down, just as they are nationally. But we're still 34% higher than the national average. Our young adults are still sitting at 58% higher than the national average. And our older folks are coming in at a substantially higher rate of increase as well. When we take a look at perception of harm, the concern there is this, is that the misinformation that's out there around this drug, the lack of good research and study that we have, is leading to a perception that it is less harmful than cigarettes and alcohol, the two indicators that if we know in this country the cost to society that they bring, and now we think marijuana is safer than those. We look at ER, ED, and healthcare issues, we're seeing an increase on this one. And again, it goes back to availability. When we want some information, the problem that we ran into is where does the average person go? And we're trying to solve that. Again, we don't try to take a position pro or con one way or the other. We present data, let the data speak for itself, and then you make the determination of value out of that for yourself based on your own standings and beliefs. But to get some legitimate information, this is the website we have up and running. We just tore it down, refurbished it, and put it right back up again. The premise being is that if you're trying to get neutral information from an unbiased source, this is a resource that's there. Everything from written documents, reports from various agencies, training videos, it's all there. Free to use, free to share, free to download. It's there for you. And the offer I would make to this group is that if you have questions that come up later on, here's my contact information. Something that comes up, needed to discuss, can you tell us facts about this? Let's take a look. And I'll tell you, if it's something that I have, we'll get it to you. If not, we'll look it up together. With that, I'll yield my time, open it back up to the chairman. If you have any questions, we can specifically address those or move on.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Next, we'll be listening to Senator Franzen and presenting her bill. Senator Latz.
Are we going to have an opportunity to ask Mr. Quigley a question or two, or?
We were hoping that after all testimony, we would ask questions at that time.
Okay. Well, then I won't ask him any specific questions right now, Mr. Chairman, but if it's possible for us to get a copy of his PowerPoint presentation, that would be helpful. I don't see it in the packets unless my packet's missing something. If he has any information regarding states other than Colorado and how they compare to the data that's been presented here about Colorado, that would be helpful. And I'd like to know exactly what the HIDTA is, if it's an independent organization, if it's an arm of the federal government, or exactly what it is. I'm not clear on that. Maybe I missed it earlier. But.
So the HIDTA program says
Mr. Quigley.
Drug Trafficking Area. It comes out of the Executive Office of the White House. It's administered by the Office of National Drug Control Policy. It is federally funded. The HIDTA program itself is 37 initiatives across the United States, all geared at domestically and internationally preventing drug trafficking organizations from bringing their drugs into the country and selling them to prohibitors and domestically. As I said during the introduction, ours is different. We are not an enforcement initiative. Ours simply is about sharing information. That's the third tenet of the HIDTA program. Somebody figured out to share information openly and have conversations.
Mr. Quigley? Mr. Quigley, we usually don't have discussion on the side of the room. If you would like to make those comments from the front table, you're more than welcome to do so. Senator Latz, did you get an adequate answer, or should we have Mr. Quigley go to the testifying table?
I'm satisfied, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Latz.